everyone. Welcome to the Idea Roastery. I'm Jason.
And I'm Herman.
Herman, are you happy that we've made it this far? We've made it to 100 episodes.
We have. Yeah. Well done you, well done
Well
me.
done, us. Yes.
Yeah. I remember back when we first started doing the pod, whoopsie, I just dropped my microphone, which hasn't happened in 100 episodes. Um,
Yeah,
so
we're still making fumbles.
what I think is interesting is that at the beginning of this journey, you said something along the lines of some big number, 95, 99% of people won't stick to something enough for it to be important, right? So it's like if you go to the gym 3 times a week for 5 years, you are in the fittest 1% of people. You're not necessarily the fittest 1% of people who exercise regularly, but you're in the fittest 1% of the population. And so while everyone does try at some point in their life to start a podcast, I think getting to 100 episodes is something that very, very few people do. So congratulations, us.
Yes, congratulations. It reminds me of something I heard recently that like Warren Buffett made, I think, 80% of his money after the age of 75. So it's kind of like this idea of like compounding, right? And I think podcasting, because it's such a, well, I think firstly, we're not actively promoting it, as in we're not pushing it out on social media like some people do. And so it really has been like the most slow organic growth story. And it's also with any kind of medium like that, it does take a long time to kind of perfect. And also just to, gather enough people who listen and then enjoy and then like continue to listen to the podcast, right?
Yeah, just for a bit of context, for those of you who have only joined us recently, the the genesis of this podcast project was that Jason left South Africa for the UK, and well, I was going to miss him, and he was going to miss me and our chats. So we're like, let's just have a fat chat every 2 weeks, record it, put it up on the internet, and so we did that, and I've gone and I've listened to a couple of those first episodes, and like we hadn't really figured out this whole background noise thing or audio quality thing. So it's just like echoey inside of a small booth with the sound of a fan going in the background. So it's definitely matured over the years, but I'm really glad that I've gotten to have conversations with you every 2 weeks for the last 4 years, 5 years,
I think
somewhere
it's
around there.
about 4.5 years, actually. I think our first one was in like May or something. That was when we first did the recording. If you look at the future, though, what do you think the next sort of 100 episodes is going to look like? Or what do you think about, standing on the edge of infinity, like where we're going to go?
I would be very comfortable with carrying on what we're doing. We pick an interesting topic, we do a bit of research, and we have a thoughtful discussion about it at the end of every 2 week period. I think what's really nice about this is that it could go however we want it to. We could decide that, hey, let's become like actual podcasters, try and create a following, get a proper editor to come in and like add the sound effects here and there to make it more of an audio experience. Or we could just, carry on doing what we're doing, and everything in between is perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. Even though it's organic, there is a chance that it would grow. I've looked at like a couple of other podcasters out there. They all show you this graph of like the first like 100, even 200, even like if you look at like the Joe Rogans and like these big sort of podcasters, like they've had hundreds of episodes of where it's like nothing, and then it like gains in popularity. And I don't know if that's just becoming better podcasters because there is a certain form factor that we need to like get used to when you become a podcaster. I think maybe over time you do become like really good at like hitting what it is that people enjoyed listening to.
I think you also become a more concise speaker, and you learn over time how to more clearly describe what it is that you're trying to say. I do think that with shows like Joe Rogan or any of these other podcasts that have guests, is the once you get one or two big guests on there, then bigger guests start lining up, and then you have the President of the United States on your podcast. Now, since we haven't actually ever had a guest on the show, we don't have to worry about that.
What topics do you think are the most interesting to talk about, or where do you think that we kind of have a groove? Because that's something I've been thinking about is like where everyone says like build a niche community. Where do you think our niche is?
I think most recently it's been on societal change due to due to the design of our cities and due to the design of our software. And this could encompass AI and education, as well as how social media platforms are designed and what the incentive systems are, and similarly to how cities are designed and the effects that that has on the population. So I guess it's more macro these more macro trends that we tend to discuss, but every now and then it's, about like how do you do what you do well.
And so moving on to what we want to talk about today, we want to talk about goals. And what would you say are your biggest goals?
So that's actually a that's actually a good question. Uh, I don't necessarily have any big goals. And it is something that I've been thinking about because I went through a period of my life where I did set goals, but I realized that my goals I didn't necessarily think about the process of goal setting very well. And what I would do is I would choose goals that weren't necessarily within my control, right? So let's say, for instance, a an example of a bad goal is to say, I want to earn X amount in the next however many years, right? Is you can work really hard towards that goal and you can do a whole bunch of things right, but you can also get to the end of that period and through no fault of your own, you may not achieve that, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a failure. That doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't done your best. But life is a roll of the dice. I think that there are other kinds of goals where the product of that goal is significantly more about the effort that you put in as opposed to just luck, right? And so, for example, if I said, I'm not a runner, right? I can run, but I'm by no means efficient at it. And within a kilometer or so, I'm like, cool, I'm done here. But a goal to say run a marathon is that's pretty much entirely within the effort that I put into it, right? So if I say I'm going to run a marathon in 6 months' time, I can go and I can start doing a training program, get up to 5Ks, get up to 10Ks, get up to 20Ks, uh, and there's programs and everything. And this is something that people regularly do. And the effort is pretty much all from me. And if I don't manage to do it, it's because I can kind of like it's because I did something wrong. Yes, there are, rolls of the dice in there as well. Yes, I could, get sick or have to go through a big life change that has interrupted my training program or something like that. But by and large, it is actually about me getting up and going and doing the thing every day. And so that's kind of my two different kinds of goals, and I haven't really figured out what my big goals
Yeah.
are.
What do you see as a long-term goal? Because I think we're talking mostly about those, but surely you have shorter term, like, maybe there's certain places you want to go travel to, there's certain things you want to do, maybe not necessarily like monetary goals. And so where do you put that line of like, this is something that I'm going to have to work hard to get to? Because you could like, oh, I feel like a sandwich and you make yourself a sandwich and you've achieved your
That's
goal,
more like
right?
a to-do list item. So I think that there's also a difference between like goals and commitments, right? And like you could, wangle a commitment into being a goal. So it's like a commitment is something like I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week, right? But a goal could be something like I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week for the next year, And so I don't necessarily see that again as being a good goal because what you're really trying to do is you're really trying to set the commitment of exercising regularly. Um, so when I take a look at like short-term goals for myself, it's most of the things that I want to do are really just commitments. And to not toot my own flute, but I'm actually very happy with my commitments and with the things that I have set out to do and I've implemented into my life. I write regularly. I work hard at my job or my business. I exercise regularly. I maintain my relationships in a way that feels true to who I am. And so those are the important things to me, but I wouldn't necessarily classify those as goals. I think what a good goal would look like for me is, at some point, people over 30 start wanting to do like silly things like, do an ultra marathon or a big physical challenge, maybe to prove to themselves that they're not necessarily decrepit just yet. And that bug has been kind of itching at me for a while. So I haven't set any explicit goals yet, but something that is difficult that I can't just go and do right now. So, for example, Robben Island is 7 kilometers off the coast of Cape Town. I can see it out of my window right now. And every year they have a swim called the Freedom Swim. And the reason it's called this is because Nelson Mandela was a prisoner on Robben Island. So the idea is that you swim from Robben Island to Cape Town, or actually to Bloberg. And it's incredibly cold. It's a very, very cold ocean. You're supposed to do it without a wetsuit. Now, I can't do that right now. If I were to attempt to do that, I would surely die. Whereas if I were to say something along the lines of, okay, I'm going to go and do an ultra marathon, I'd probably be able to finish it, but I'd probably walk most of the way, right? Like one of those like 60K trail runs. Like I could probably do that right now. I wouldn't have a good time doing it, but sure. But there's something that's very tantalizing about a big goal like doing the Freedom Swim, where it's like I definitively cannot do that right now, and I will not be able to do that unless I like commit a decent chunk of my life to achieving that goal. Does that kind of
Yeah.
ring true for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've also got physical sort of like health goals. So part of the reason I quit my job was also just to try to get back on the horse, as it were, as you said, like reaching 30, although it's not an old age in the span of life. It is an age where you like start to feel the aches and pains. And so one of my goals was to become fit. And I would say that that is more of a longer term goal because obviously you can just do a couple of weights and do a couple of runs and then you feel like better, but you're not actually like sort of energetic and sort of peaking as you would if you were like actually like fit. And also I think it was more of a lifestyle change, which I guess wasn't really my intention, but I think what you were also touching on is the kind of like the motions that go into a goal. The way that I think about what you said there was there's kind of two types of goals. There's output goals and then there's input goals. So the output goal could be that sort of you want to have a certain revenue or you want to have a certain type of business and you want to earn a certain salary. But what you need to get there is you need to do a bunch of small input goals because there's things you can't control, but there are things you can control that can help get you that result, right? So where you might want to make a certain amount of money, you might have to reach out to a certain number of people every day and do like a cold outreach. So there are like smaller input goals that will contribute to that because the more customers you meet, the more chance someone's going to spend money and the more chance you get a big customer who's going to pay you. So I kind of like to delineate those two. And I've also, similar to what you were saying, more recently started to look more at just the input goals. Whereas I think anyone who's kind of considered not made it yet, they always like to get stuck up in the ideas, oh, what if I had this much money, or what would I do with this? Or, you kind of get ahead of yourself. And so it's more what I've been trying to do more is just focus in on like what are those input goals, and then pairing that with, like you said, the discipline of like doing them, and also getting sort of used to the idea of like this is just what you do to get those outcomes, right? You just have to, you know, wake up, you have to go to your desk, you have to, put in the hours, and in a way, yeah, you can't really control the output, but I think you tend to have this kind of,
Like set yourself up for success or to achieve what it is you want.
yeah, because I think everyone knows that there's certain behaviors that will probably be better for you. So maybe it's going to meetups or, putting yourself in more interesting environments. Um, those I don't think there's not really that much downside. Obviously, everything in moderation, but uh, you kind of need to have a little bit of a push, but you kind of know inside what's going to be better for you for that goal. And so you just kind of have to do more of that and avoid being distracted by other things that might be more attempting.
The way that I personally think about this is that I'm very much a trust the process kind of person, right? And so let's take, for instance, I'm trying to improve Bear in some measurable way, right? Either I want more people to use the platform, or I want the platform to be better, or a combination of the two. So if I take a look at what you referred to as input goals, I would kind of look at those as commitments, right? I'm going to commit to working on this, every weekday. I'm going to try and ship something for, yeah, and just carry on doing that. Or I'm going to commit to writing because I love writing. I love sharing my ideas. I love hearing from people who read my work. And I'm going to be more regular with it. So instead of just waiting for inspiration to strike, what I do is I do what real writers do, and I put on my writing pants at least once a week, and I publish something. And so with those, it's kind of like I relate this to exercise because I've been doing a lot of that lately. But each individual session that I have at the gym doesn't have a very big effect. It actually has a negligible effect. And if every time I come out of the gym and I say like, have I reached my goal of getting in shape? And I like flex in the mirror and stuff. Like the answer is no, because the actual effect of each individual session is completely negligible. And that's where the concept of like just trusting in the process comes in, is that I just have to believe that if I carry on doing this regularly, I will be stronger, I'll be fitter, I'll have more mental clarity, etc., etc. In the same way, if I sit down at my computer, you know, 4 or 5 days a week, and I try to improve the thing that I'm working on a regular basis, then that compounds over time. And each individual update that I ship is completely negligible, but aggregated over a year, 2 years, 5 years, wow, that's actually something pretty impressive. And so that's just my way of framing it, but I think it gels very well with your structure of input goals and output
Mm,
goals over there.
mm. So what is it that motivates you if you don't have any sort of long-term goals, like per se? What is it that motivates you to work on your
Whew,
project?
that's a really good question. So it just so I have a bunch. I receive emails from people and I speak to people and they say like, "Hey, I really want to do what it is that you do." And to be fair, it is actually a very nice lifestyle. I can set my own hours and I can work on the things that I find interesting. But one of the problems that I deal with regularly is that I don't have much of an external incentive to work or anything. Is that I don't have a boss breathing down my back. It's not like I'm freelancing or running an agency where if I don't ship something, then I have angry clients. If and my company comes crumbling down around me. It's more, and again, I'll just bring it back to exercise. It's more like that in that if I don't do it, for one day it's fine. for 2 days, it's fine. For a week or even a couple of weeks, like I could get away without doing any work. But then one day I'll just wake up and I'll realize, oh, I'm not fit. I've lost all my muscle. And what's happened over here. And the same applies to my job. So essentially, what I've had to cultivate is like a strong intrinsic motivation and a strong sense of trusting in the process. In a way, it's kind of weird. It's kind of like a belief. I kind of have to trick myself into believing that if I
Yeah.
carry on doing this, then good things will happen. And it is also logically the case. So I can like logic my way into it, right? But I also have to believe it because I have to wake up
Yeah.
every day and like make myself do that thing.
Exactly. Do you like I've been reading a little bit about this idea of flow, and it's quite a common sort of thing within the sort of finding your path kind of series of books that are out there. It's would you say that you have flow when you're working? And the way that I interpret it is it's more like you kind of have this sort of intrinsic sort of motivation. You can kind of like focus on a task. You really feel like everything's like in the right place. You like doing what it is you're good at, and you're like constantly improving yourself in a way that's like challenging enough, but you're not like falling too short that you become, sad and like can't do anything. Would you say that you're in flow, or how do you feel like that plays into the way that you sort of achieve your goals?
Sometimes I find myself in flow, but it also comes down to the task that I'm working on, right? So it's like if I'm working on a feature or, fighting a particularly interesting bug, yeah, absolutely. I'll find myself in flow. I'll forget that lunch is a thing that people have and, like tear myself away from my computer, like blurry-eyed, after 4, 5, 6 hours. Um, but most days I don't. Most days I do some technical support. I answer some emails. I do a little bit of moderation. Might like outline the draft of an article that I'm working on. And especially because I'm doing multiple tasks or I'm not finding myself in like with a specific task that I'm working on. But the days that I do find myself with a good specific task to work on and I can really like dig my teeth into it, I absolutely find myself in flow and I do enjoy it and I love that feeling where time just kind of flies by and you're just one with the work that you're doing. So absolutely, but I can't rely on that as being my motivator.
Yeah. I feel I'm in the same boat, but it's like almost as you said, the flow doesn't pay the bills sometimes,
Yeah.
or you still have to do the other things around it. I guess it's maybe that is something that people can sort of put as their goal is like to one day reach that sort of flow state where they have this sort of command over what they're doing in a sense that gives them this like powerful feeling that they can kind of do whatever they want, but they're still feeling challenged in a sense. The other thing I would like to know is, do you ever introduce challenge into what you're doing? Like, because obviously in the physical sense, like you're like, lifting heavier weights and all that, but do you have the similar thing in your sort of development projects, business, life?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I absolutely do. I think the best example of that right now is I don't use any AI tools when I write software. That's not entirely true. Like if I do get stuck on something, I will use Grok or ChatGPT as a way to look up documentation or find, some good references to things, kind of like what I would have used Stack Overflow for in the past. But I don't use an integrated tool like Cursor or Claude Code or anything like that. For a couple of reasons. I did experiment with them for a while and I did try and use them. And I found that I was never finding myself in flow because what I would do is I would tell it to do something and then I would focus elsewhere and I'd like go and I'd fiddle around with another part of the code and then it would have a response for me and now I'd have to switch back to thinking about that code and then I'd read through it and I'd say like that's not entirely right, do it but do it this way, and then it would generate something again that wasn't exactly what I wanted. And I'm also very opinionated about my code. And I've written all of the like from top to bottom, Bear and Just Sketch Me are all handwritten by me. And so I know it incredibly well, and I have a very particular way of doing things. And so what was happening with AI is that technically it was computational offloading. Like, yeah, I had to not think as hard, but I enjoy thinking hard and I enjoy being in that state of problem solving. And it completely removed that from me. And instead, it felt like I was a manager for, a decently competent intern. But it's just not the way that I wanted to operate. So I went and I removed all of those tools from my computer and I went back to just a standard IDE. I don't even use code completion, to be honest. Um,
How much code you're writing, man? Yeah, my fingers get tired these days. I'm like, I need something to finish it up for me.
No, no, fair enough. And it also really depends on the project that you're doing. So it's like if you're working with other people's code, like AI is an invaluable tool. You just say like, take a look at this and write good stuff for it, and then you audit it, and that's great. But these are projects that I've spent the last, 6, 7 years of my life writing by hand. Like I know them so, so very well. And I feel like by using these tools, I was slower while feeling like I'm being more productive. So it's an interesting space.
It kind of reminds me of, I think back in the day, I wasn't actually like old enough to be even like speaking in the day I'm talking about, but people used to run like nightly builds. Like the term nightly was because they would just set it to compile, and then overnight it would compile, and the next morning they'd know if there had been any bugs.
Yeah.
And that was the only way to tell. And so sometimes you like waited the whole night, and then you got there and it like failed like one hour in.
Bit of a tangent. My
Yeah.
parents were software people back in the 90s. I mean, technically they're still kind of software people now, but they were doing some software stuff back in the 90s, and they needed to install a new operating system. I think it was some kind of FreeBSD, and it came on something silly like 12 or 13 floppy disks. And when the last disc came out, my father accidentally dropped the disc on the power button of the computer, and it turned off the computer, and they
Oh
had to do
no.
it all again. And it had taken like 2 days for them to complete the installation or something silly like that. So us over here with our like, oh, this transpiler every single time I save, it takes like
Yeah.
1.3 seconds to build. Is just
Yeah.
not good enough.
I guess that's why they have like pinball and stuff on computers. It's like something to do while it's like compiling.
Solitaire,
Exactly.
yeah.
Or maybe they just, like get the GameCube out. Um but the other thing I wanted to ask is, so if you were to take on a big task, or you obviously don't do lots of like longer term planning, like what kind of tasks like interest you, that or how do you pick, again, like how do you pick which direction to go down? Is it just purely on vibes? Obviously, like you're in a position where you kind of like, you're not really worrying about sort of monetary, like, bringing bread home by the end of the month kind of stuff. Like what sort of draws your attention? Like if you were to, for instance, I think you've tried creating a couple of other like businesses and stuff, but what is it that motivates you to try do
Mm.
those new things?
So with uh, new projects that I take on, um, whenever I decide to do one of those projects, I have a little internal heuristic for myself, and that is I kind of try and define what done looks like, or what the minimum viable product looks like. And I think that for a long period of my life is I would start and put down projects on a weekly basis. I'd start making this video game and then I'd kind of like move on to something else and then move on to something else. So now whenever I pick up a new project, I do it with the intention of it getting to a point where like other people can use it, right? And maybe I'll like write a blog post about it and see if people do actually use it. And if people do actually use it, then it's something that I can invest more time into. And so I've done this a handful of times over the past couple of years, and I have the biggest instance of that was the mathematics tutor that we were running via WhatsApp to sort of serve underserved communities here in South Africa. And so I went and I said, okay, here's what I kind of have to do to validate this. Get the software running. Then I was working with a business partner, Eric, and the idea was to, at the very least, try and get like one, maybe two customers. We managed to get one customer. We spoke to many, many other potential customers, but no one actually bit. And over time, we also realized that this isn't necessarily good for education. This has kind of definitively been, so it's also been something that you and I have discussed that like turns out that the more assistance that people have when learning, the more they want to computationally offload. So I think the premise was actually a bit flawed from the beginning. But I had to take it to the logical conclusion to really see that for myself. What this does also mean is it means that I don't take on projects very lightly anymore. Is I don't start a project without the intention of getting it to the point where I can kind of validate it. Um, and this does actually make my life a little bit easier because I'm not just like overwhelmed by domain names that I've purchased and half written code that's sitting in my computer.
Would you ever take on something that you don't? So the way that I'm hearing it is it's like there's certain types of businesses or problems that have like a finish point, right? But there's certain things like you know, eradicating poverty, building nuclear fusion, like any of those kind of what you would call like a big project. Would you ever be drawn to something like that? Like, say, making solar power like the dominant sort of force in South Africa or anything like that, which doesn't necessarily they have a tangible output, but you're not quite sure how to go there. You're not quite sure the path. Would you ever be drawn to something like that?
I think that would be more of like a process goal. Like so it would instead be or like a commitment. So it would be not necessarily like I'm going to make solar the dominant power form in South Africa, but it would instead be like I am going to sort of get into the solar energy industry in South Africa with the intention of creating meaningful change to energy availability and pushing for renewables. I think and again, this works for me, but I think for other people, setting like a pie in the sky goal of saying like, I am going to make solar the dominant energy source in South Africa is great for them, but it doesn't gel well with my mind because the way that if I were to make that statement, I know that it would be false because there's so many things out of my control. So instead, it would have to be a commitment to doing things that would potentially get me to there, but I wouldn't have it as a goal because I kind of feel that I'm setting myself up to fail it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's there's a form of optimism where you just kind of have to like you trust the process, right? Like we were talking about. And it kind of comes into when I think about like certain roles out there, like there's this term of like business development, right? Like no one really knows what it is or like why people get paid a lot of money to do it, but you essentially just and it's almost you essentially just prod this like massive system and also, like coming from an engineering background or like studying engineering, like I always think about things in systems and like, just most industries are just very complicated or complex systems, right? You can't quite, there's no sort of linear output if you put a certain input, but there's ways to sort of inject energy into the system that you can potentially get some sort of output out of it, right? So if you run enough events, you get people sort of clashing together, then maybe some of them will form startups or they'll meet each other, they'll form companies, and then you'll have like a couple of companies that are operating in an area. But you're not like really you might have that goal to kind of facilitate it, but you're not necessarily like waiting for that specific outcome. You don't really know how it's going to manifest. And I think with these like big goals, I've been trying to think about how you actually go about tackling them in a mentality that's more sort of bootstrap friendly, I guess. Like whatever you've told me here is it's just like the bootstrapper mindset is like, how do I get MVP? Like, what's the next step? What's the next step? But if I'm thinking about like we always talk about urban environments, if I wanted to like, take a small suburb in Cape Town and make it like a mecca for AI development, like which is it's a great idea, great project, but like you can't just do that by like you either have to have like tons and tons of money, which I don't, but you need to have a way of doing it in a way that's, sustainable, but also gonna, potentially lead to those outcomes. And so it's just like something that I think about when it comes to longer term goals is like, what are the best sort of mechanisms to enact change on the system
I
in a
think
way?
you're right, and I think that there is also, there is something I don't want to say self-defeating, but there is something that um, doesn't allow for moonshots within the goal framework that I have. I think it edges towards realism, which is not necessarily the best way to elicit great change, right? Great change does require people to say, like, I'm going to do something absolutely silly. Watch me. So you're completely right over there. I'd I think that there is also another thing where it's like you can still decide to work towards, or not necessarily towards, but work on something that has the potential for change. And it's really just like a way of framing it. But on that note, what are your goals? What are your ambitions or your processes that you have?
Well, the first thing I've learned is to kind of this idea of essentialism or which is similar to minimalism. It's like finding like the essential things to work on. I read this quite interesting book called Die with Zero. And it's basically one of the concepts that struck me was this idea of, within your lifespan, you've only got a certain amount of time. A lot of people can't comprehend the idea that they're going to die. And so you kind of have to come to the realization that there's certain things you won't be able to do. And there's certain things or goals that become unavailable to you as your life progresses, right? And you may or may not know that they become unavailable to you, but they tend to do that. And there's obviously certain goals that are better suited for different times of your life. So, like, obviously, if you want to become fit, it's probably better to do that early in your life. If you want to maybe learn a language, maybe it's a little bit, you can kind of do it quite well to a certain degree. If you want to become a professional violinist, you probably need to do that earlier. But there's certain goals that, could be better suited for an older age. Like, so one of my goals I've always had is to, well, more recently is to have like a coffee shop or open up a coffee shop. I thought, yeah, it'd be cool, just like have a really cool hipster coffee shop and everyone just like chills in there and it's got like little events that go on, all that. But it's also alongside other goals, well, my current goal, which is to start a business because you need to be able to fund the coffee shop. But also, when I think about it as like coffee shop, you could reasonably do that as a 40-year-old, 50-year-old dude and you can have a nice time. And a lot of people are like, oh, I want to retire and open up a tiki bar in Maui or whatever. And so I've kind of like shifted the priorities around in a sense. And I actually like write down. So I like usually about once a year, I kind of have this process where I like write down all of like my big goals, like what I want to learn, what I want to do, different like experiences I want to have. A lot of them tend to be kind of experiences. I'm not really like a things person per se.
There's like a yearly bucket list kind of thing.
Like I want to learn like another language or something like
Mm.
that. Or I want to sail the Caribbean or something like that. Like there's like all of these kind of different kind of goals. And then I sort of do a bit of a selection process, but then I tend to whittle them down into I've got those like sort of high end goals, which I guess those are like maybe the sort of moonshot goals that you mentioned. But I also have sort of a separate list, which is like what I think is my 10-year sort of business goals. Because obviously, like in order to fund the fun, you have to have some sort of income. And so that's potentially why having a business or like the career goals are like kind of built in there as like these are what I'm going to focus on. And then from there, I distill it into like sort of 5 year goals and then 3 year goals and then 1 year goals. As in, like, if I want to achieve this, what is that I need to do to get there? And then I kind of like by the time you go from 5 year, which is like outputs, to 1 year, which is like input goals, and then like I kind of have a quarterly kind of goals, but I it's usually on an annual basis that I'm like, this is what I'm going to focus
I
on.
like that. I like that. And I actually have a yearly goal setting session with both Emma and my brother where, we talk about what it is that we set for ourselves the previous year and if we manage to achieve it or we feel good about it. And what is it that we want to achieve this year and what is it like what kind of intentions do we have for the year? And so for the past year there have been and I've kind of put it into like both again commitments and goals as like do this thing that's a goal, go and work towards this thing tends to be a commitment, but absolutely with you on regularly extrapolating forward in your life and trying to I don't know just trying to become a better you
Yeah.
or like a more wholesome human.
Yeah. And I also think like because the your like time spans of people's lives are more than likely going to increase. So we're going to have people, more and more people living, to 100 at least. Um, like I've never really been a one goal kind of person. Like there's lots of different things that like, and I guess this is more a maturity thing. Like as I've gotten older, it's like I always try and find the thing that's going to give me the best like bang for money or the best ROI. So like even in, I want to start like I've got loads of ideas for projects, but then I try and like fix them into like, okay, well, which projects depend on different parts that other projects could be done or that other projects could do. And then like what is the sort of highest ROI thing that I can do is still a sort of self-contained project in itself, but would lead me to those other sort of further down the line ideas, right? So maybe it's like, you know, I want to build this tool, but I need this thing that deploys applications or something. So I'll build that first, and then I'll build the other tool. But it's kind of also along the line of this like this sort of exploration process. So like you kind of start in one place and you kind of experiment going down a certain route, and then you kind of figure out like is this, do I feel good about where going or what I'm doing? But then sometimes you figure out, oh, I don't really like doing that thing. I don't want to do this anymore. So you go back and you try a different route. But this like idea of slowly exploring the space is also something that I've been thinking about a lot more recently.
I hear you. I hear you. And I think that's a good way to reason about it. I think we could all do with a bit more future, what would you call like future introspection, future extrapolation.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's got to be balanced, right? I think like you can because one of the other things is that when you're constantly thinking about the future, you also tend to be lost in it, and so you fail to be present. And I think that's what's one of the admirable things about the way that you approach things is that it's more like the here, the now, like the tangible, what's going to be done next. And so that gives you a lot more like enjoying the moment presentness. Whereas, sometimes people get very like wound up about like what could be happening or the things that they could do. And even worse is like when you fall short, you also like, get into the cycle of being depressed about it and you don't really
Yeah,
enjoy it as much.
I think the reason that I have the mental model that I do for how these things work is because none of the things that worked out incredibly well for me came from having a goal for it. Instead, it was very, very much a result of intentionality and process, just like trusting in the process, incremental steps towards the life or the whatever it is that I'm trying to build. And the times that I have set goals, I've been kind of disappointed with them because, through some fault of my own, sure, but in many cases also through just like that's not how economics works. I haven't necessarily hit them.
But maybe they just need to be more attainable. I think like the other part of goals is just like as you say, just like can I do half of that? Like and I guess that's also the problem or like the challenge with goals is that they can also be bad if you're like overly ambitious about what you can achieve and then you don't achieve it. And so almost like it's becomes a skill, like almost like Scrum in a sense. It's like, can you decide like what is a big enough goal? And the only way I really see of getting there is by first of all setting goals for yourself, but like hard-ish goals where you know, like, okay, I don't really know if I'm capable of achieving this, or I don't really know if I even know how to do this. But by trying to go towards it, you learn a lot more, and you push yourself. And then sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't work out. And so, but I bank on myself having learned the stuff, and then that makes me more valuable for what I do next. Right. So I might fail tremendously, but then at least I know what to look out for. I know what to like, not do. And then when I try again, then I can like, have a bit more wisdom when I approach the problem.
And so we learn here.
Yeah,
Well, I think that summarizes, or very, very holistically summarizes how I feel about goals and how you feel about goals. And I think this has been a good 100th episode.
exactly.
And I think that for the next 100 episodes, I'm going to carry on showing up and making them as enjoyable as possible.
Indeed. Have a good one.
You too.